Okay, let's try it again. Can everybody hear me now? We have still 5 minutes left for Q1. Oh, great. Now it works. I'm very sorry, everybody. Okay. We still have 5 minutes left in Q1. Elliot leading this Q1 at the moment with a 140. Faradeus in the Ferrari just behind him with a 1.40 as well. Only 10 hundredths of a second of distance from each other. Blind 30 then on P3, but Faradeus is here trying to finish even better now. Going into corner number 15. Down here we can see why most of the corners are so difficult. Now here, Wrath on P4 and EQ on P5, Sebo still on P6. But at the moment it looks like all of our drivers will pass on into Q2 and make it as a very safe spot for now. So I'm very sorry that all of you couldn't hear me. But Baku is a very challenging track for everyone because it's very fast. And now here we can see Faraday struggling because he doesn't have any more engine power due to lack of fuel. Now all of our drivers are in the box. I think we will only see the AI now trying to get better, if so. Some cars are going out here as well. I'm not quite sure who. It's a Renault. It's the one from EQ going out here again on another out lap to maybe make his time a little better. Well, Baku is a very interesting track with roughly 6 kilometers to race for the drivers. That's about 3.73 miles. And its first Grand Prix was raced in 2016. Yeah, Baku is very interesting because you have a lot of straights. You've got about 1 to 3 straights and a lot of corners, which here we can see very good in EQ here, coming into corner 8, which has been fatal for some drivers. For example, for Charles Leclerc in 2019, that has been the year in which Valtteri Bottas also won the Baku Grand Prix, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Yeah, and I think at the moment all our drivers are pretty much safe to go into Q2. There's a round of a 1 second distance between Sebo in the McLaren, who is currently on P6, and Charles Leclerc, who is on P7. Here we can see EQ now going into his third lap of Q1 with 1.5 minutes to go, or 1.5 minutes left on the clock. And that's what I meant by saying that it's very difficult for the drivers, because you have to look at the brakes. You really have to know your braking game, how you really have to be confident with your braking, because that is very that's something that can happen very often here in Baku, to bump into the walls, because it's a very tight map. It's a very tight racing circuit. You've got very few spots to overtake, to really overtake, which mainly consist obviously of the straights and some few corners, but it's mainly a track that is very, very difficult to drive, and really, if you know how to brake, then it's an easy track. Now here we can see EQ with a very good sector 2 and sector 3 now starting in here. And he's finishing his second lap. Maybe getting a little better. And now everyone is automatically into Q2. So EQ has saved himself P4 for Q2. Here we can see it. Elliott finishes Q1 on P1. Farideus in the Ferrari on P2 just behind him. 16 milliseconds of difference between the two drivers. We will now start Q2, obviously. This is going to be a little bit more interesting than Q1, and we'll look at the drivers, how they will perform. Rath just opt out of the session. That means he will start from P15. The other drivers are going to go on the track. At the moment I can only see AI drivers on the track, but that's obviously not something bad. Well, 14 minutes in Q2 for the drivers to qualify for Q3 and finalize their racing position. And well, all our drivers are now on track except Sebo and Elliott. We've got Farideus here coming out on his outlap. We've got Elliott now on his outlap as well, and Blind 30 also already in his outlap. EQ is out there as well, which leaves Sebo as the only driver in the box at the moment. Sebo still leading the F1 Esports League at the moment with 66 points. Farideus just behind him with 25 after winning the last Holland Grand Prix. If you want to watch that, just click on the link and you'll see our YouTube channel where you can see all our Grand Prix. Sebo now coming out of the boxes as well to start his first lap. Farideus now, here we can see him. After winning the last Grand Prix, the question is, will he be able to win this one as well? 2 consecutive wins in a row for Ferrari. Or will Sebo 55 regain that P1 for him? Elliott, on the other hand, on P3 in the Driver Championship with 19 points. Starting to go. And we've got a yellow flag on blind 30 here, which is resolved very quickly. Another yellow flag. Does it look like he's having some problems with the car or something? I don't know. But there is a yellow flag. Whatever. Well, the first AI drivers are finishing their laps, and yeah, Blind is letting the other drivers by. Here we can see Fari still in his first lap. Now sector 2, closing in on finishing it into the last corner, corner 15. There we go. Finishing sector 2 with a 1:16. That's very good. And we've got our first driver who finished his first lap. It's EQ, finishing with a 1:42.3. Very good lap time for Baku. About 1 second of difference between EQ and Lewis Hamilton, the AI driver. And Fari now finishes his lap and finishes on P2 as Elliott passes him with a nearly 0.2 of a second of time difference between the two drivers. We've got about 9.5 minutes of distance here to go. Elliott now slowing down because he's missing fuel, as it was his last lap here. That's where you can see him slowing down. Now we'll follow Sebo, who has got himself into P3 with that first lap of him. And Blind is back in the box. He's still missing a lap, but we obviously have enough time left to finish that, so no worries, no problem there. Elliott now still trying to get back to the box. He already has his P1 spot, with here we can say Farideos only 1/10 away. Sebo 1 second away from Elliott. From Farideos, I'm sorry, and EQ 1 second away from Sebo. And Elliott and Farideos are the only two drivers with the mediums on at the moment. Now the Ferrari driver also going into the pits, because he pretty much has his P2 or his Q3 spot saved, so he doesn't have to really fear of dropping out there anymore. We can see now it's Sebo starting again, and Blind currently P15 going in his outlap. Here's the corner of corner number 8, which is very difficult, or one of the most dangerous for the Formula 1 drivers, but not for ours. Our our F1 drivers are mastering these corners of Baku very well. Elliott and Farideos also went into the box and finished the session. So EQ currently also on another outlap here, warming up his tires for Q3. And now Blind is about to start his first lap of Q2 in the Red Bull. And here you can see it a little bit closer. EQ also going out on his mediums for this extra lap with 5 minutes left on the clock for Q2. And Blind now is pretty much the only driver who needs to bring some time on the clock on the board to secure this Q3 spot. Coming into corner 8. Here we are. And yeah, he's doing a pretty good job, as all the drivers are. There's seems to be no problem at the moment with the track. I mean, sure, there are some yellow flags, but that's mostly mainly for not much fuel, and that's no problem. Blind finishing sector 2 with a 1:15, so better than the Ferrari of Farideos. Now he's closing in on finishing his first lap, currently on a 1:35 in sector 3 now, and finishing it with a 1.40, securing him Q1. That was a very, very nice lap from the Red Bull driver. Beautifully done by Blind. Just pushing Elliott and Farideos one position further down. Obviously all the drivers are pushed further down. Elliott now positioned on P2 with the mediums, Farideos on P3, Sebo on P4, and EQ, who's still on track here, on P number 5. But maybe EQ can save that and go a little bit faster. Now we will look at his time. There's a yellow flag in sector 3, but that one already resolved. EQ's getting a little faster, and 2 of the 6 drivers today are still in the game, with EQ and a Sebo 55 who's in the box. Now some of the AI drivers coming out on track again. We've got a yellow flag in sector 1, but that's just the AI. So EQ saving himself P4 for Q3, and Q3 is really the thing that we will be watching, that we are interested in, to see how everyone will wind up and what the starting lineup will be. Well, around 3 minutes left on the clock for the drivers to get some better times. EQ now slowing down because we can see that he has not much fuel left anymore, which is obviously no problem. Yeah, that's basically it. EQ is the only driver of the F1 Racing League still on track. Unfortunately, Rath just opted out of the session of Q2 right at the beginning, meaning that he basically just couldn't bring some time on the board, and couldn't qualify himself for Q3, which means he just has to start the race from P15. Now we can see Q also going into the box, meaning we can jump forward to Q3. Well, we're finished with Q2. As I said, Blind currently on P1, taking the position of Elliott, and Farideos EQ, who managed to get to P4, and Sebo on P5. Reth, who opted out of Q2 by mistake, unfortunately has to start the race from P15 now. So the Alfa Romeo driver will have to start from further down the grid, but I'm sure he will be able to gain his position back. So we're now in Q3, having 12 minutes for the drivers to save and finalize the positions for the starting grid of the F1 race in Baku and the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Now all the AI drivers are already out on track. Sebo, the only one of our drivers on track at the moment. So we will follow him, obviously on his outlap, swinging a little with his car to warm up the tires. EQ now on his outlap as well. And we still have the Ferrari of Farideos, the Racing Point of Elliott, and the Red Bull of Blind in the box. Farideos with the Ferrari now coming out as well onto the track. And yeah, I'm very curious to see what the drivers can do, what the drivers will be able to achieve, and who will get himself P1. So now the drivers are starting their first lap, the AI drivers, and now Sebo also going into his first lap of the race. Fari, Elliott and Blind still in the box. EQ and Sebo are out on the track. Sebo now with a Sector 1. Fastest Sector 1 for the McLaren driver. They've got EQ here just behind him. And he does the fastest Sector 1. Now Farideos on his first lap as well here. Elliott on his first lap, and Blind still on his outlap, but not much missing for the guys there. Here's Sebo going into the last corners of the track. And here he is in corner 19, I'm sorry, now he's in corner 20 to finish on this straight and get to the P1. Yes, 142.9 for the McLaren driver. Next one to come in after him is EQ. We'll see if he will be able to get that P1 spot. Yes, he will, by 2 seconds, and making the fastest lap as well, obviously. Very, very well done by EQ to finish on P1 at the moment. There's a yellow flag, as it seems, at the end of sector 1 here, but it's resolved very quickly. Now Farideos with a 139.1, fantastic lap from the Ferrari driver, and we've got Elliott just behind him. Now finishing his first lap on a 139.3, so about 139.4, so 0.2 of a difference of a second of time difference between the two. Elliott would have liked to get that P1 spot for now, but there's still 5 seconds to go, so the Racing Point driver still has got some time to secure P1. Blind now on the last corners of this track. We've got the first drivers going back into the box. And we will see where Blind will finish. He's going to get himself to P3 as he's going to go past EQ and Sebo 55. Now Blind decides to finish the race on P3. We'll see if EQ and Sebo will be able to get past him, but at the moment both of the drivers are in the box. Faraday is on P1, but he's also missing some fuel, so he will go into the box. Elliott will go as well. And well, we've got all 5 drivers located on P1 to P5, with only Rath, unfortunately, on P15. Sebo still going out for another lap again on the softs. Will he be able to go past the guys in front of him? Here we can see the drivers. EQ has not done any laps on his current softs. And Farideos with the fastest lap of the qualifying session at the moment with a 139.1. Elliott just behind him. Blind just behind Elliott. And EQ, who's still in the box as well, on P4. Sebo now on his outlap, maybe trying to regain a low position back, maybe coming up to P4 or P3, or maybe even P2 or pole position. But we will see if he will now be able to get a better place in the racing grid. Now Elliott coming out on track again as well. On the softs, EQ here as well on his outlap, and Sebo finishing his outlap to start his last lap of this qualifying session with 3 minutes left on the clock. There's a yellow flag right in front of him. Nothing serious happening there. And the drivers are doing well at the moment, all of them. Really good job. EQ and Elliott still being on their outlaps. Sebo finishing sector 1 with half a second less than his fastest lap. Here we can see him cutting into corner number 8, and now he's coming on to arriving to sector 3. Elliott now on his lap again, finishing sector 1, or no, starting sector 1. EQ is about to finish his outlap. Sebo now on his lap as well here on the straight to maybe get a little bit faster, but unfortunately he's not been able to gain any positions in that on that drive. Now there's EQ on P4. And we've got Elliott here who's coming on to sector 3. We'll see if the Racing Point driver will be able to go past the Ferrari of Farideos and get those 0.2 of a second that he needs. Good corners from the Racing Point here, and on the straight maybe he will now be able to get himself the pole position. And yes, he will. 1.38 138.7 for the Racing Point driver. Elliott has done it. He has gotten himself P1, pushing Farideos down to P2, away from the pole position. Charles Leclerc as the first driver to finish this qualifying session, as all the drivers are now finishing the qualifying session. EQ going back in the box as he's happy with P4, and Sebo will try to get a better time, but he's not going to be able to pass EQ. Elliott being very happy, I can imagine, with P1, and that pole position for the Racing Point, well deserved after a very, very good qualifying session from him. Elliott now on his way to go back into the box, and Sebo is the driver who already has finished the qualifying session, as it's already over, and everyone else is in the box. So at the moment, or for the race, the top 10 is going to look like this. We've got Elliott in the Racing Point on pole position, Farideos in the Ferrari on P2, Blind 30 is going to start from P3. EQ starts in the Renault from P4. Sebo on P5 in the McLaren. Charles Leclerc, the AI driver, on P6. Valtteri Bottas on P7. Lando Norris on P8. George Russell on P9. And Kevin Magnussen on P10, which leaves Rath as the only driver who hasn't made it into Q3 and into the top 6, unfortunately, but we know that that is not his fault. So here we can see it again. That's going to be the starting grid for the Grand Prix of Azerbaijan. And now we will start into the race, which is obviously a very, very interesting part, as the race is very challenging for every driver, especially the start, which can be a real mess up. But we'll hope that the drivers won't crash and that we will see a clean race. As I said, the drivers now have roughly 6 kilometers to face each lap. 2016 was the first time that the Formula 1 was racing in Baku. And Baku actually is a very interesting track, as it combines parts of the modern city with parts of the historic city, which obviously makes it a city circuit, just like, for example, Monaco, running through the streets of the city. That is special about Baku as well. 20 corners, and here we have Elliott and Farideus and the other drivers on their formation lap. Here we can see the strategies that the drivers are probably going to take. Well, I think we have a very interesting starting grid. Sebo only on P5. Rath, unfortunately, disqualified, as well as Alexander Albon. I think they didn't start. Well, Rath is no longer part of this Grand Prix. I'm very sorry. And a little bit surprised as well. That is weird. Now Elliott crashing on the formation lap as well. And he's been disqualified as well from this session. So we've got Farideus, Blind 30, EQ and Sebo as the drivers that are missing. on the grid. Right, they've been disqualified from the formation lap. Not from the race, I'm sorry. My mistake. So, we'll wait for the Baku city circuit to be raced on again. And here we can see the drivers starting. So it's lights out and away we go, obviously. As Faraday instantly takes the lead. And Blind 30 keeps himself defending Sebo. And staying on P3. Faraday is instantly taking the lead here from Elliott. Just passing by the racing point. And Blind now half a second away from Elliott in the racing point. EQ dropping down to 2 positions. Charles Leclerc, the AI driver, passing him. And also Reth having a little challenge, a little fight here with Daniel Kvyat, which he in the end can secure for himself. That is going to be a very, very interesting battle at the top between P1 and P2. The Ferrari and the Racing Point are going to challenge each other a lot this race. Now we can see less than 2/10 away. Now it's half a second. And EQ is about to go back on P5. I don't know why Valtteri Bottas doesn't have a time. And Rath now having to fight again with Daniel Kvyat. Coming in to Sector 3 and finishing that fastest lap for Farideus in the Ferrari, as we're now going into lap number 2. And we've got EQ, who has regained P5 after losing it at the beginning of the race. Rath and Giovinazzi both have to go into the boxes, probably due to some damage that they have on the front wing or something, maybe the tires or something else. But Faradeus is still trying to defend himself from Elliott passing. And Blind is getting closer and closer to Elliott as well, to the top 2. EQ now getting closer and closer to Sebo, who's trying to pass on the McLaren. And Rath now with 26 seconds of difference between him and Lance Stroll, who's on P17 after that very early box that he had to go through. We're here again, EQ just behind Sebo 55. He just really wants to pass the McLaren. And we've got Elliott still trying to go past Farideus, but the Ferrari is doing a very good job. Here we can see him. Now the Red Bull may be having a chance to go past the racing point on the straight, because he's getting faster and faster every lap into corner 2. The top 3 is now very interesting, and EQ has managed to pass on Sebo 55. So Sebo 55 has now dropped down again to P5, but he regained P4 with a very, very nice overtake there. EQ now has to try to gain that position back. Meanwhile, Elliott is getting closer and closer to the Ferrari in front of him. And Blind is trying to keep up with the 2 drivers in front of him. EQ still not that far away from the McLaren of Sebo 55. Here we can see again Sebo cutting into corner number 8. Now they're in the corner number 10, and maybe here on the straight the Renault will be able to make that pass. We'll go back here. We'll return to the top tier, to the top 3 here, as Elliott is dropping back a little, because it seems like the Ferrari of Farideus is a little faster. About 1 second of distance now, as Farideus has managed to increase the time difference, but now it's Elliott who's done the fastest lap, and there's a yellow flag in sector 2 for Rath, but it didn't look like nothing happened. Oh yes, it seems like his front wing is damaged. I can't really... Yes, he's got some front wing damage here, which means he's probably going into the box again after just having been in the box to repair that damage that he had in the first lap. And we're now currently in lap number 4, and we still have a very interesting battle here at the top. Now Blind a little bit behind after losing around 1 second of distance between him and Elliott. And Elliott is also 1 second away from Farideus in the Ferrari, who is currently leading this Grand Prix after the first 4 laps. Sebo now trying to get closer to the Renault of EQ, who has done a great job by passing Sebo 55. And now Elliott still half a second away. Maybe now with the DRS he will be able to pass the Ferrari driver, who's trying to defend his P1 spot. Now on the straight, maybe Elliott will be able to go past Sebo now in the box. And Elliott is not that far away anymore from passing the Ferrari driver, who seems to become slower and slower, but I don't really know why. It seems like he's got a lack of ERS. Maybe on the straight the Racing Point will be able to pass on the Ferrari. Blind still about 2 seconds away from Elliott, but fighting for that top spot, for that podium spot. EQ 12 seconds away from Farideus. And now, as I said, maybe in this corner's late braking, and he's hit the wall. Elliott has hit the wall. Now Farideus has passed him again. And yeah, he's got some front wing damage. That means that when Elliott is going into the box, he's not only going to have to change his tires, but also his front wing. Farideus regaining his position. And yes, Elliott is going into the pits to repair that broken front wing. Blind also following him into the box, as now the box are open, and they're all trying to go with that one-stop strategy, or most of the drivers are going to try that one-stop strategy. Blind passing Elliott on here because obviously Elliott had to change that front wing. Now EQ dropping down to P12 due to the box, and now currently the Grand Prix is led by two Ferrari drivers, by Farideus and Charles Leclerc, who has blind 30 just behind him in the Red Bull. Elliott currently on P5 and George Russell on P4. Well, that's a position that the Williams driver only knows out of that one track race with the Mercedes. I'm sorry. EQ now dropped down even further behind, just behind two McLarens, not one but two, the one of Lando Norris and Sebo 55. And the Grand Prix is still led by Farideus, who also in the Holland Grand Prix has done a great job all race long. I mean, now at the beginning of the race, he obviously had to fight a little against Elliott. Now he's going into the box as well. He had to fight a little against Elliott in the racing point, but unfortunately Elliott went into the wall, which obviously gave the advantage to Farideus and the Ferrari driver, who now has to change front wing as well. And there's a safety car. There's a yellow flag and there's a safety car as Elliott has got a time penalty, as well as Esteban Ocon and Valtteri Bottas here. There's a little bit of a crash as it looks. EQ is still free of that, but there is a crash, and it's involving no one currently, as they all cleared themselves again. Daniel Kvyat, Kevin Magnussen, Lance Stroll and Valtteri Bottas were the ones involved in that crash. EQ now coming back onto P number 7. And here we go into the second boxing stop for the ones going for that second strategy. We still have a safety car, that yellow flag, which Blind used for himself to gain that P1, and that a safety car is obviously always great for the race leader. You don't consume your tires very easily, and you can keep on racing for these laps. You go further into the race, you pass on laps, and you don't lose positions. That is great for everyone who has a good position at the moment. Farideus obviously on P2 after having to go into the box. Blind currently on P1, and if the Red Bull driver is able to get that P1, that racing win of this day, that would be really, really great. But he still has Farideus behind him, about 1 second away. But the Ferrari driver is getting slower, or at least the distance is getting more and more every lap. Now EQ, who's 7 seconds away from Charles Leclerc and from that P6 spot, and maybe now Rath. Yeah, he still has 17 seconds. The other drivers are all out of this race. Valtteri Bottas, Stroll, Kvyat and Kevin Magnussen all out. We're now in lap number 8, and it looks like probably in lap number 9 we will be racing again if the safety car will go back into the pits. We'll see. Now here we can see the situation out of the eyes of blind 30, and now out of the view of everyone. You can see the Mercedes safety car, the Red Bull just behind him, then Farideus in the Ferrari, Alex Albon on P number 3. Very lucky for the Red Bull driver there. Lewis Hamilton currently on P4. George Russell with that safety car on P5. Charles Leclerc on P6. And EQ on P7 with Pierre Gasly just behind him, who is just staying behind because of the safety car. Because I'm very, very interested in seeing when the yellow flags are being released and the safety car is going into the pits, into the box. If then we will be able to see a little battle between Pierre Gasly and EQ. Rath now, obviously, the safety car gives him some time to gain back those positions that he needs. As it's obviously slowing down everyone, the safety car. We're now in lap number 8 and finishing to start lap number 9. And EQ has got himself a 5-second time penalty after he went into the box. Yeah, that's because he was speeding in the box, and that's obviously something that you can't do, or you shouldn't do. But well, we will still look at it. Rath now coming closer. Here we can see it now. We've got a yellow flag on the whole track, obviously. EQ now with a 5-second time penalty for the Renault driver. And Sebo on P13 just behind him. Blind still leading this Grand Prix in lap number 9. Well, and as I said, the safety car, of course, is a bit of a bummer, because you never want to make a Grand Prix consist for the main part out of, I don't know, a safety car. No one wants that. If you want to watch a Grand Prix, you want to have some fun, you want to have some driving experience here, some people that are racing. But on the other hand, it obviously gives a little bit of a second chance to the people who dropped down. For example, Rath now with 12 seconds of difference between the safety car and himself. The safety car is going to go on until Rath is able to get back into the line here. And well, now we just have to wait. We can't do anything. Now the safety car is going in this lap. So lap number 10, we will race again. And now we can see Farideus, the Ferrari, trying to overtake. But there's still a yellow flag. And here's the green flag. We are racing again. And Farideus is trying to go on the inside past Blind 30. But Blind is trying to defend. And he's done it, keeping the Ferrari behind him for now. And that is still a very, very interesting fight. We had now 3 race leaders onto now. We had Elliott, obviously with the pole position. Then Farideus taking that pole position right at the start, and Blind 30 making use of that safety car to get P1. Oh, now the Ferrari of Farideus going a little bit into the walls here. But still, Rath now around a second away from Antonio Giovinazzi in front of him. EQ with half a second away from Sebo. That one was a fight we saw a lot in this first 10 laps. And Sebo now closer to passing Roman Grosjean. And Blind is able to keep Faradeus on the long line, on the stretch. So Sebo is closer and closer to passing Roman Grosjean. Here we have EQ going past Sebo, and we have another yellow flag and a virtual safety car with Elliott having done a crash with Charles Leclerc, bringing out the virtual safety car. Well, that means we'll have to wait again, and that brings another 5-second time penalty to Elliott. Rath also gets a 5-second time penalty after a collision with Sebo 55. So now we've got 4 out of 6 drivers with a time penalty due to collision in this race in the Baku Grand Prix. And of course a virtual safety car. And now we will race again. EQ climbing up to P11, and yeah, there's been a crash again. I've seen Sebo crashing into the back of EQ, and here now Sebo has lost his front wing. Now the DRS is activated again, which means Faradeus can try to start attacking Blind 30 again for that P1 spot here. EQ passing Lewis Hamilton, who's gone into the box, and Grosjean. All in the box now. EQ now on P9 and Rath on P11. A low fight between EQ and Esteban Ocon, which in the end the Frenchman Esteban Ocon has decided for himself. Now Lando Norris being passed by Esteban Ocon, and EQ doing, well, a very dangerous but very good maneuver to secure himself P7 and also P6, but losing it again in that corner here. Rath now closer and closer to get into the points. And here we have Sebo and Elliott. Elliott not with a time penalty, but Sebo, Rath and EQ do. They all have a time penalty. Sebo now in that constant fight with Elliott for P number 14. And on the other hand, there's a yellow flag which resolves, and Blind is now about to get passed by the Ferrari of Faradeus, who's pushed out, but Faradeus uses the ERS and the DRS to go past Blind 30, not only securing himself P1, but also the fastest lap of the race so far. Blind now not that far away from Faradeus. Will he be able to gain back that P1 spot? That is a very, very interesting race battle at the moment. At the top, we've got these two drivers who are racing and doing consistent laps every lap, and they're really putting up a fight, as well as all the other drivers, of course. As here, for example, we've got Elliott and Sebo, who are trying to get back into the points. Now Elliott, maybe he will be able to go past him on the straight using the DRS and the ERS, everything. He's got everything on. Now on the straight. Now inside on the corner, and yes, he's gone past Sebo 55. Rath goes into the pits, having to change tyres and front wing with a very, very long pit stop here. Antonio Giovinazzi, we can see him here, and Elliott is now closing in on Esteban Ocon, as we also have Sebo just behind him. EQ on P7 behind Pierre Gasly to get to P number 6. But we don't know if he will be able to get that one. We know Pierre Gasly is a great driver, but here the only thing that counts is passing, which we have here as Elliott is pushing out Esteban Ocon. Oh, he's gone very fast into corner number 8. That could have been very dangerous. Now Sebo still half a second away from Esteban Ocon and about a second away from Elliott to get to the points again. Elliott is putting up a fight, as well as EQ is, to get past Pierre Gasly, maybe now on the straight. And on the other hand, we have a big race change here with Farideus, who is now 19 seconds away. We've got a yellow flag in sector number 3. That is between Sebo, who has been disqualified. He's out of this race. Sebo is out of this race, meaning he cannot improve his leading position of the F1 Racing League. Rath now on P14 and now on P13. Elliott now on P11. EQ on P6 after passing Pierre Gasly on the straight, and blind 30, 20 seconds away from Farideus, and still 3, 4, half a second away from George Russell. And there is a yellow flag and a virtual safety car again. Well, I'm very sorry for Sebo 55 for for the disqualification here, for being disqualified of this race. We've got a yellow flag in sector 1 and sector 2, so there's 2 drivers having some problems, and it looks like Lewis Hamilton is one of them, because he's slowing down. Probably having some motorical issues or something. But we will concentrate on our drivers. This another yellow flag in sector 1, sector 2 and sector 3. Well, now it looks like Hamilton has finally retired from this session, as did all the other drivers and Esteban Ocon. EQ now being passed by Lando Norris, but obviously still a yellow flag. No safety car though. Blind coming back on P2, but he still needs 20 seconds to Farideus, who has been racing very, very consistently, just as in Holland. We're in lap number 15, 10 laps to go at the moment, and we really have some consistent drives here. Sebo is out, EQ as the remaining driver, but he's out of the session as well. Which basically means we've got 4 drivers in this session left, with Rath in the Alpha trying to get back into the points. Elliott onto P9 here, who unfortunately lost all these places after that pole position that he gained in the qualifying. And then we have Blind 30 here. He's getting faster and faster every lap. Already 3 seconds closer to Farideus than before. Rath now passing EQ. And that leaves the 4 drivers here for the last 10 laps of this race. Well, now we just have to wait. Still around 9 or 10 laps to go for some drivers. George Russell now going into the pits. Blind 30 here, still trying to get to Farideus, but it's a big time difference. So Farideus probably will have to pit in the next few laps. Here we can see Alex Albon gaining 10 positions, Roman Grosjean gaining 13, Farideus gaining 1, Blind 30 also gaining 1 position, Elliott losing 7 after that pole position that he already had, and Rath winning 4 positions after starting from that P4, from that P14. Here we can see Rath also having 4 stops already, due to all these incidents that he had. Elliott also with 3 stops, Farideus with 1 stop, Albon and Gasly with no stops, both of them on the hards, with 16 rounds on the hards. Farideus with 9 rounds, with 9 laps, 10 laps on the mediums, and Blind now with 2 laps on the mediums. So maybe as soon as one of them will go into the pits, that will give the other one the chance to overtake here. But we'll still look at that. Elliott is around 3 seconds away from Grosjean and P number 6. Gasly and Albon already on 17 laps with the hards. Rath on 2 laps with the softs. And Farideus on 10 laps with the mediums. Elliott on 5, who has now passed Alex Albon and is trying to attack Roman Grosjean as well. We'll keep an eye on that. If that is going to work, that's going to be very interesting, because I believe that Elliott is still going to be able to get back into those top 5 spots here. Maybe now on the straight, after corner 18, 19 and 20, he's going to be able to pass the French driver. There's still not much missing from Elliott and Roman Grosjean. Now on the straight that is coming up, the racing point is maybe able to pass the Haas driver, and yes it is. Elliott goes past Roman Grosjean to secure himself that P5. We've got Blind 30 on P2 still, and Faradeus on P1. Rath is currently on P11, trying to fight himself into that P number 10. Albon currently in the box. Pierre Gasly having to go into the box in the near future as well, which means that Rath maybe will get the chance to fight back on that position. Elliott still trying to get into the top 3 here, with around 1 second of distance between him and George Russell in front of him. Both of them going now into corner 8 and 9. Here we can see the old castle, which is the historic part of the city of Baku. And probably Elliott is going to be able to pass George Russell on the straight again. Sebo 55 has left the session as well. And now here, Elliott might be able to pass the Williams, just as he did with the Haas. And yes, he will be able to cut just behind to pass George Russell from the left side here. Rath still trying to fight in. Grosjean and Gasly now in the box, both of them having to change the tyres. Gasly also having to change the front wing. That gives Rath some time. Maybe he can get back into the points here. Gasly now dropping down, obviously because of that, but he's at the exit of the box. And we can see Faradeus again here, going into the box, which, if he has to change front wing, would maybe give, which he doesn't, he doesn't have to change the front wing, which obviously doesn't bring Blind much closer to him. A little bit closer though. There's a 1 second distance between the two drivers, which could make it a little bit more interesting again on the top. Unfortunately, Faradeus has the softs on his car, which makes him a little bit faster than Blind 30 with the mediums, but it looks like with the DRS, maybe the Red Bull driver will be able to pass him. Oh, that's very wide here, but still not touching the wall, which is the important part now on the straight. Maybe with the DRS, or the ERS, I'm sorry, he will be able to go closer to Faradeus. If he go into the box now, then Blind will completely lose that advantage here that he had. He's 1 second away from Faradeus, who's obviously faster on his fresh softs. Elliott now on P3, after Charles Leclerc went into the box to get himself these fresh softs as well. And Blind 2 seconds away from Faradeus in the Ferrari. Oh, that's a very dangerous corner cutting here from Blind, risking that time penalty for him. Elliott now 37 seconds away from Blind, and Blind is trying to get back to Faradeus. He's trying to get there, but unfortunately the mediums are just not fast enough to pass the Ferrari on the softs. Maybe now in the corner where the Ferrari is going to slow down a little, but it doesn't look like it has a great effect on the speed of the car. Rath now still on P11 with half a second away from Antonio Giovinazzi. Faraday still on P1, Blind 30 on P2 in the Red Bull, and Elliott on P3 with the Racing Point. I feel very sorry for him, as he unfortunately had to lose all these positions after that pole position that he had in Q3. But still, we're able to see a very interesting race now with 4 laps to go, and we have a yellow flag in sector number 2, where it looks like Rath has been disqualified. And yes, that is right. Rath is out of the session, which leaves the top 3 here alone in the session. Faraday is on top, Blind 30 on P2, and Elliott on P3, which would give us a great podium at the moment. We've got another yellow sector here with Lando Norris and Roman Grosjean, as Lando Norris is slowing down and probably going to go out of this session as well. But at the moment we still have our front 3, so that is the only thing that we care about right now. Three laps to go. To finish this race. And it's looking like Faraday is going to add another victory to his last victory from the Holland Grand Prix. Obviously, you cannot know about that, but still. Don't celebrate too early. So now we still have 3 laps to go with our front 3 consisting of Faraday's, Blind 30 and Elliott. And Faraday now with another fastest lap of the race, with his new fresh softs, obviously. Here you can see him, Elliott, having pretty old softs, pretty old mediums. Or well, 10 laps already on his mediums. And yeah, now it's only those last 2, 3, those last 2 laps that are missing here. Those last 3 laps, I'm sorry. Well, Faraday's also had the best strategy, you have to say it now. Well, not the best actually, finishing the last 5 laps on fresh softs. Basically could have been good and could have been bad, but it turned out to be a good decision, as Blind just didn't have to grip to compete with the fresh softs of Faraday's, so he just couldn't go past the Ferrari drive anymore. And yeah, now it's up to the drivers to finish their own race here. And it's on with the last 2 laps. Now, Faradeus is coming into the last lap of the race, into lap 26. Blind on P2, and we're all into the last lap of the race. Elliot just behind them here, about to finish his lap 25. Elliot already in lap 26. So last lap of the race here. Antonio Giovinazzi is about to get blue flagged by Faradeus, the AI driver. But since it's the last lap of the race, obviously it doesn't matter anymore. Now here we can see Faradeus cutting into the last corners of this track to get himself that race lead that he really, really deserved after a great performance by the Ferrari driver. Passing the blue flag Giovinazzi and getting himself that win here in Baku. Congratulations, Faradeus, on P1, and another win for the Ferrari driver. Blind 30 now also passing the cross line and finishing on P2, the Red Bull driver, with a great performance today. Just behind Faradeus and the Ferrari. And Elliot now about to get onto the last straight here to finish his race on P3. Here we can see him. And well, I have to say congratulations to all of the 3 drivers on a full F1 Esports League podium. Elliot finishing on P3. Blind finishing on P2, and Faradeus finishing on P1 after a very, very consistent race. Here we can see the 3 drivers. Congratulations to all of them, to all of the drivers. A very nice race today. Very nice one. And well, fighters, has got himself his second victory in a row. So now we'll see if anybody wants to do some interviews. Well, it seems like no interviews are going to be done today. Then, congratulations again to the drivers, and I wish everybody a great weekend, and see you next time.